Gerald Feierstein is the former U.S. ambassador to Yemen. He's now the director of the Arabian Peninsula Affairs program at the Middle East Institute. Thanks so much for joining us as we continue to try and track the reaction from this speech. I want to get your reaction, given that we had been told that perhaps it would be a conciliatory speech. It was not at all.
It's a pleasure to be with you, Paula. I think that there are two main themes here. On one, it is conciliatory, and that is that Netanyahu was extremely careful to stay out of the American political context right now. He was equally positive, equally thankful to both Republicans and Democrats, very carefully balancing President Biden and President Trump, so that he avoided the pitfall of getting dragged into this American presidential election period. But beyond that, and I think that both of your correspondents were quite accurate in the way they characterized his comments. Not a word about the Palestinian, innocent Palestinian civilians, not a word about any positive image, not only of the current conflict, but of what comes afterwards. His only talk was about a Gaza that's disarmed and de-radicalized, he said, but still under constant Israeli security control. Nothing about what happens afterwards, nothing about anything that's positive. Some of the things that he said were clearly not true. And of course, he smeared just about everybody, no matter how sincere they were, smeared everybody who has expressed concern about the situation in Gaza, calling them pro-Hamas or Iranian useful idiots. This is not a way to build up support, nor is it a way that he's going to bring Americans together in support of where Israel is right now.
Yeah, and notable, in fact, that some of those protesters are not just Jewish. Many of them are just peace activists who want Hamas to release the hostages and equally would like the suffering to end for those in Gaza. I want to ask you, though, as regards to U.S. Middle East policy, where does someone like President Biden go now with this? Because he is going to be in a room behind closed doors. Do you believe that the president now, the fact that he is not running again, do you believe this makes him a little bit more free to perhaps be a bit tougher with Netanyahu and get him to that ceasefire deal?
Well, I think that there's no question that the president is going to continue to press Netanyahu to be more forward-leaning, more cooperative in trying to end the Gaza conflict, end the humanitarian disaster in Gaza. Think a little bit more about what comes afterwards. For the president, it's not only a question of his own legacy, but it's also understanding that, particularly within the Democratic base, he needs to bring people along because their willingness to vote for Kamala Harris is going to depend an awful lot on whether they think that he's doing what he needs to do, not only to protect Israel, but also to do something favorable for the Palestinians. So he's going to continue to press. Whether or not he's ready to really put his foot down with Netanyahu, and whether that means anything to Netanyahu is an open question.
And what do you believe will come of the meeting with Donald Trump? I mean, at this point in time, this is, I have to remind anyone, a very close election that is upcoming. He definitely went out of his way, Netanyahu, to praise the Trump administration and the former president himself. What do you believe will be the contours of that meeting on Friday?
Well, it's going to be very interesting to see because, as your correspondent pointed out, even though Donald Trump was probably willing to go much farther in taking steps in favor of Israel, Netanyahu mentioned them, the recognition of Israeli sovereignty in the Golan Heights, recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, transfer of the embassy. But Trump was angry at Netanyahu because Netanyahu was early on ready to recognize President Biden's election victory. And Donald Trump didn't like that and has been cool to him ever since. So Netanyahu is trying to make up. And of course, he wants to make sure that if Donald Trump does win the election, that he's going to continue to have a friend in the White House. So I think that it's going to be a very warm and fuzzy relationship, but very much Netanyahu being the demandeur here, the one who's looking to improve the relationship.
And we will leave it there for now. Gerald Feierstein, thank you so much. Appreciate it.